All right, thank you all for coming tonight. I am David Lovegrove. I'm the director of the museum, which is a very new role for me. I worked at Bob Jones University for more than 20 years, almost 25 years, ended there as chief marketing officer, but I left there a year and a half ago to take over operation of this museum. So I have a big heart for higher education. Education is a significant part of our mission here at the museum, and I'm thrilled to have these students. This is the smallest class. This is our fourth year. This is the smallest class of the 4 years, but arguably the best class. They took challenging projects. One of the students, I said, that project is much too hard. You shouldn't do it. And he did it anyway. And he did a good job of it. It was something else that is notable about this particular class is this year is Greer's 150th anniversary, our sesquicentennial, and the museum has been leading the city in events and activities. And my time has been very distracted from these students. They didn't get nearly as much help as they normally get. And yet, I was just amazed to see what they did. So a couple of things. One, their slides were made beautiful by them and then imported, and it broke everything. So if you see ugliness on slides, pretend that they're beautiful because the students made them beautiful, and blame Microsoft or somebody else if they're not. Let's see, last couple of things. If you haven't walked through the museum, we would love for you to. Just in the door right there, walk through and just see some of the things we have here. We are gearing up. As soon as this event ends, we're tearing all of the equipment out and heading over to Greer Mill, getting ready for a huge event Saturday at 1 o'clock, part 2 of our series, The Story of Greer. This one on the textile era, and it will be held in Greer Mill, which has been under renovation for 3 or 4 years, and the first time people will get to see it. So it's an exciting one. The actual presentation is fantastic. I'm so excited to share it with you. Like this is the next. There's 4 in the series. 3 and 4 are going to be bad, but 2 is great. So come see it. Free event Saturday at 1 o'clock. Okay, I am going to shut up. I am going to introduce the new professor of Bob Jones University's class, HI 105, Introduction to Historical Studies. Our good friend, Dr. Brenda Schofield, was professor the last 3 years, and this year it's Dr. Roger Bradley. And so I'm going to introduce him, he'll introduce the program, and then the students will get going.
Well, thank you, David, very much. Really, my goal is to do a little more than just thank a certain number of people who have been such a great support to us, but also to tell you a little bit about our course and what we're trying to accomplish with it. History 105, Intro to Historical Studies, is part of a new developed set of courses that allows students to get what we call experiential learning, not just book learning, but actually getting your hands dirty and your fingers into things that you might not otherwise be able to do. And this course was designed specifically to allow students to do that. And so the museum and David and Jonathan and all the volunteers here have made it very easy for us to kind of jump right in and disturb their lives on a regular basis so that our students could be exposed to what museums do and how to do historical research and all kinds of lots of very fun stuff like that. And so I do want to say thank you to all of those who have been so supportive to us, and very grateful for that. And Lord willing, we'll be able to keep doing that going forward. And we're very pleased what the students are able to take away from. I think you will be very impressed with all of these students and the work that they're doing. They've done a great job, and I'm sure that if you want to talk to any of them afterwards, they would be more than happy to chat with you. In fact, they probably would like to chat with you because they're really interested in what they're doing. So thank you to everyone. We appreciate very much your being here, being supportive to the students that are here, and we're very grateful for the opportunity. Our first presenter, I will let him present himself, but it's Trent Hedrick, and he's going to come start us off, and then they're just going to come one right after another. So Trent, come on.
So as he said, I'm Trent Hedrick. I'm studying history at Bob Jones University. I'm from Illinois. So I'd like to start off by thanking you all for taking times out of your busy schedules to listen to me and my friends talk about history. We love to do it. All right, so first, if this is going to work. Okay, so I thought I'd give you guys a look at the college experience by giving you guys a quiz. I know, we all love it. Don't worry, it's only one question, and I won't grade you guys too harshly. All right. In its entire history, how many police officers has Greer lost in the line of duty? Was it A, 1, B, 5, C, 10, or D, 15? What do you guys think? All right. Well, y'all failed. The answer is A, 1. Oh, okay. Good job. 100%. 100% right there. Okay. All right. That one was a man by the name of Willis Foster. Guess who we're talking about today? All right. First, a little bit of background. So in the early 1900s, Greer was under dispensary law. This basically meant that the government had a monopoly on everything related to alcohol, where it could be produced, where it could be consumed, where it could be bought, where it could be sold, everything. And just outside of Greer is a place in the state known as the Dark Corner. This place was known for its illegal activities, including during this time, moonshining, whiskey running, all that fun stuff. And Greer officers took their jobs very seriously. They viewed themselves as the thin line between Greer and the Dark Corner. And they were right. Willis Foster was among them. Not much is known about his early life. We do know that he was born in October 18th, 1867. His parents were Esom and Lucy Foster, and he was the third youngest of 9 siblings. Man. All right, we know that later on in his life, he worked on a farm that was owned by his future mother-in-law. His future wife and her siblings lived on that farm. It could be assumed that they met on that farm and fell in love there. Speaking of his wife, that is a picture of her up there. Her name was Mattie Pennington Foster, and they got married in 1897. They had 3 kids, Cohen, Laura, and Edith Foster. All right. So that's the background. Let's get into the main event. July 2nd, 1904. The day started out pretty exciting for the Fosters. See, back then, you had to supply your own uniform if you were an officer. There was really only one person who had one, and that was the chief. But Willis, he had been saving money, so he bought himself a uniform. I lost the word there. He bought himself a uniform. He picked it up, and he took a photo for his wife and kids as a keepsake. That's the photo pictured right there. He reported for duty, and everything was normal. It was a normal shift. At about 10 p.m., he saw some suspicious activity. He followed somebody who he believed to be a known bootlegger into a heavily forested area. Now, we're not entirely sure about what happened, but we do know some things. We know that witnesses reported hearing 3 gunshots. We know that Officer Foster was found dead at the scene. And we know that he had 2 bullet wounds, one to his arm and one to his chest, the one to his chest being fatal, piercing the heart. There were 4 suspects apprehended for this crime. You had Boyce Stone, Jim Nobles, Watt Nobles, and George Downs. It was believed that Boyce Stone and Watt Nobles were the 2 main culprits behind this crime, Boyce Stone being the person that actually committed the act, while Watt Nobles was an accessory. The others were charged with violating dispensary law. This is an article summing up their trial, but don't worry, I'm not going to make you read all that. I'm going to sum it up by saying they were found not guilty. The evidence was too circumstantial. They only had some witnesses that were too far to see anything. They had Boyce Stone saying threatening things about Foster earlier that day, but that's not really enough to convict somebody. And there was a lot of inconsistency involving the murder weapon, so much so that the jury had to find them not guilty. Boyce Stone promptly left the state after that. All right. The aftermath for the Foster family was devastating, obviously. They lost a father and a husband. But that was not all that they lost, unfortunately. His mother, Lucy Foster, died 2 days later at 73 years old. And his youngest child died a little over a month later at less than 2 years old. I cannot imagine the amount of loss that they must have had to endure. The aftermath for Greer was some good, some bad. Officer Foster was the first and only officer to be killed in the line of duty in Greer's entire history. They made a monument in his honor. That's it pictured. You can't tell by that picture, but that thing's 7 foot tall. Best picture I can find. The Greer citizens were rightly outraged, even making like a mob to go after some of the suspects' family, viewing them as undesirables. There was a lot of vigilante stuff going on. It was a real mess. As for the police department, the reality of the job hit several of the officers, one of whom ended up even quitting. And it was hard to find replacements because nobody wanted to take the place of the dead guy. But they did make several strides in the dispensary law. They ended up taking out several bootleggers, several whiskey runners. They took a lot of them off the streets. When you take out a police officer, they tend to take it personally. And lastly, they gave officers benefits. Before this, officers were kind of volunteers. There weren't any benefits. There wasn't health or dental or severance or anything like that. But after this event, they made sure that Officer Foster's wife was taken care of and that the funeral arrangements were covered. And about a year later, they made benefits for everyone. That's my story. I found most of these pictures on a website called gravefinder.com, surprisingly. And thank you all for being such a great audience. Thank you.
Hello, I am Micah Chapman, and I'm here to present my historical research project to you all, which is about the story of a murder of a man named John Chapman. Now, I was interested because we happen to share the same last name, although, despite my research, I was not able to find out if we were related or not. Well, let's get into the story. Well, the events took place in rural Spartanburg County near Holly Springs on the morning of January 26th, 1902, when three men, John Chapman, Samuel Staggs, and Eugene Norman, were trespassing near the Old Miles place, which is something that doesn't really have much significance to us now, but the three men were all last night, throughout the entire night, drinking and gambling, when an argument ensued in the morning, which escalated into violence, ultimately leaving John Chapman shot twice and ultimately dead. Ultimately, Staggs and Norman were at some point taken to Spartanburg jail. Allegedly, they gave themselves up, although the sheriff had to search for them to find them. Now, to give you an idea of where it happened, this is a 1907 map of Salida, North Carolina, and I'd say about the lower right-hand corner is about where Holly Springs is. So you can see it's right near Spartanburg, Greenville. So there's a better map there. You can kind of see where Holly Springs is. It was around that area. So, however, the interesting part about this is how the newspapers reported on all of this. So I'll go through some of them. Now, the Greenville News, where I got a lot of my information for this, and their January 29th, 1902 version of the newspaper, states that Staggs shot John Chapman twice in the chest with the intention to murder. Now, the Bamberg Herald, on January 30th, 1902, they got the news a little later, stated that John Chapman attacked first, with Eugene Norman having to pull him off, where then Staggs shot him once, and Eugene Norman ultimately ended up firing the second shot, according to them. But then the Gaffney Ledger, in their version of the reports, reported on January 31st, 1902, stated that Eugene Norman presumably shot John Chapman twice. lots of very mixed up details between the reports. Some of the reports say he died in a few minutes. Some say that he remained unconscious after the injury, but managed to survive all morning until the afternoon. Some say he was shot in the chest. Some say he was shot in the head. Others say that it may have been self-defense, that Sam Staggs had to shoot him. Now, what about the court version? Well, ultimately, according to the state in their version of on March 8, 1902, the newspaper, on March 7th, the night before at 11 p.m., Samuel Staggs was found guilty of murder with a recommendation to mercy. However, about 2 days later, Samuel Staggs ultimately received his life sentence, life imprisonment in the Spartanburg State Penitentiary. Therefore, the legal resolution has apparently arrived in this story, but that is not the end of the story, as the case was opened up almost 3 years later, and as reported by the state in the December 29, 1904 newspaper, Governor Duncan Glinch Hayward of Spartanburg received petition papers for Samuel Staggs' pardon from Mr. Staniari Wilson, the U.S. representative of South Carolina. Now, what the petition papers rightly pointed out was that Samuel Staggs' conviction was largely based upon the testimony of Eugene Norman. However, what they alleged, the petition papers, was that Eugene Norman committed perjury, therefore falsely testifying against Samuel Staggs. The supposed witnesses who came forward with these claims in the petition papers stated that Eugene Norman confessed to falsely testifying due to there being only 2 people present at the murder of John Chapman, him and Samuel Staggs, and that Norman lied to save himself to avoid being convicted as an accomplice. Now, things get more interesting, and as reported by the state on March 18, 1905, their newspaper, 2 days earlier, on March 16, 1905, Eugene Norman wrote to Governor Duncan Glinch Hayward after seeing the accusations made against him in the newspaper. And his statement was, I'll read part of it. I do herein state that there is no truth in it. It is absolutely false as to any confession of my part or any false swearing at the trial. Therefore, Eugene Norman denied this. However, what's important to note is that these statements were made by many, many different men, many of whom were very important. There was many statements. Everyone ranging from saying that they were simply present at a conversation where Eugene Norman admitted to falsely testifying, to others even saying that he went to them and privately talked to them about falsely testifying. However, what was the resolution? Well, Governor Hayward ultimately refused the petition, with Judge Ernest Gary of Spartanburg writing saying that he believes that Samuel Staggs was in fact properly convicted and that he, quote unquote, cannot recommend this case for pardon. Therefore, Staggs remains convicted, case closed. And from what I could tell from my research, Samuel Staggs apparently served out the rest of his sentence and died in the state penitentiary. The question remains, though, was he actually guilty? Well, certain facts are clear, many details are not. And despite being legally resolved, the case does not feel properly resolved as the truth doesn't feel perfectly known. Did Samuel Staggs murder him? Did Eugene Norman murder him? Did they both murder him? Or was it in self-defense? It's not very clear, and the ultimate verdict isn't particularly clear. And what we saw, a lot of the early newspapers, not only was there some bias in how they reported, probably some bias in how they reported, they were also very quick to report upon rumors they heard, as they wanted to get them out as fast as possible. And one thing that was clear about those newspapers is that, well, information was just harder to verify back then, so they oftentimes just reported on what they could find, and it often just wasn't very accurate. However, the question is was Samuel Staggs actually guilty? It's hard to say, because despite this case being legally resolved, it was resolved on very shaky foundations, And I think ultimately this story is a very good example of the types of just how messy early rural 20th century murder cases often were. Thank you.
Okay. Hello, I am Cameron Patterson. I live in Spartanburg, South Carolina, and I am studying history at Bob Jones University. So how many people have been to the doctors either recently or in this year or last year? Okay, so probably a good chunk of us. We usually think of doctors at clinics and hospitals, but that wasn't always the case. In fact, one of the first place to have a medical facilities is the Steele Clinic and Sanitarium in the Greer and Taylor's area. And Dr. Steele is who I am going to be talking about today. So before we start, let's cover the basics. Where's Chick Springs? What is it? What about the hotel? And what's a sanitarium? So, Chick Springs is actually a mineral springs in Taylor's, as you can see here on the map. According to South Carolina Department of Natural Resources, many springs, not just Chick Springs, were known for mineralized waters and their perceived medical or restorative power, so people would either bottle them up or use them in spas and swimming pools. At springs like these, hotels and resorts were open there, and this was no exception for the Chick Springs which also becomes a hotel. It was established by Dr. Burwell Chick in 1840. It starts as a resort, and it would turn into a hotel. And this would later be the site of the Steele Clinic and Sanitarium. So, you may be asking, what's a sanitarium? A sanitarium, according to Merriam-Webster, is an establishment or facility offering long-term medical care or establishment treatment for individuals or looking to improve and maintain good health. So now let's focus on the man, Dr. Benjamin Brodus Steele. So he was born to William Brodus Steele, who was a doctor, and Mrs. Greta Gareth Steele on December 24th, 1874 in Spartanburg, South Carolina. So at age 17, he actually graduated from the University of Georgia, and he would marry Mrs. Florence Pittman in 1897. They would have two children, Benjamin Brodus Steele Jr., and also a daughter who would later become Mrs. Jack Matthews. In 1901, he would receive his MD from the College of Physicians and Surgeons in Columbia University, as we can see right here on the picture, his name highlighted from that newspaper announcing the list of students. So at age 27, he went to Gaffney and started his first practice. The next year, he would be rewarded an MS degree by Cornell. He would practice in Gaffney for 5 more years until he went back to New York, ending his practice in Gaffney for a year of practice at the Women's Hospital in New York. So he eventually would come back, and in 1916, he would start a company called the Steele Hospital Company in Spartanburg. So this will remain open until it was sold to the Young Women's Christian Association, or YWCA. Patients of the hospital that would eventually be moved to the Spartanburg General Hospital on the day that hospital was actually open. So now to the clinic itself. So on March 14th, 1919, the clinic and sanitarium was proposed to be at the Chick Springs Hotel. Dr. Benjamin Brodus Steele would be the president and the treasurer of it, while J.A. Bull would be the vice president of the board of directors of the organization. The company would release, the one that controlled the property at the time, would release 30 acres the mineral rights to the springs, the building on the land, including a water pump to the hotel, to the sanitarium and clinic. Interesting enough, you still had people who owned cottages on the property and would still use it for their own private uses. According to Gene Flune's book, A Short History of Chick Springs, a Mr. William Goldsmith allowed the YWCA to use his college as a 2-month summer camp. The clinic would be officially open on July 1st, 1919. And during its operations, it would also train nurses as well. So I think everyone knows about World War I. With the end of that war, you had war veterans that were disabled. So on May 1st, 1922, the sanitarium actually closed, with the hotel being turned into a training school for disabled World War I veterans. It would be headed by Andrew Potter, and on July 1st, 1924, the school, known as the United States Vocational Training School, actually would be closed. Ironically enough, according to Atlanta Semi-Weekly Journal, it said it was closed due to excellent progress of veterans' rehabilitation work. The trainees that were remaining were moved to other locations. On September 15, 1924, Mrs. Frances Montgomery leased the property with the idea of reestablishing a sanitarium there. This would become known as the Chick Springs Sanitarium and Health Resort. The Montgomery Hospital, also operator, would eventually move there due to city ordinances where it was currently located. So Dr. Steedley did return back to the area after some months at the Atlanta-based Steiner Clinic for Cancer and Allied Diseases. He decided to live in Chick Springs until he could figure out where he was exactly going to live. He would operate on people, including his brother-in-law, at Chick Springs, but he also went around and operated and checked on patients in other parts besides Chick Springs. At age 57, Dr. Benjamin Brodus Steedley in Greenville County, visiting a patient in the clinic one morning, suffered a cerebral hemorrhage and died 3 hours later. It was January 12, 1932, and the importance of it was shown because the clinic would close that same year at the end in December. So here we have a poem written by Dr. Roy P. Finley on January 1992 in the Gapping Ledger. This helps to show what fellow doctors saw of Dr. Steedley. We're going to cover the last line. A busy life, nor gloom of day, nor dark of night, nor distant way, kept him from the distressed, his work well done, for him a crown. The great physician, looking down, has ordered, take thy rest. Thank you.
Well, good evening. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Audrey Rickert. I am a music major at Bob Jones University, but I also love history, so this has been a real joy for me to take this class and work on this project. Tonight, I will be talking about the life of Katherine Duncan. I had the privilege of working to preserve Mrs. Duncan's uniform over here. What I did to it was that I washed it several times with gentle soap, and we were able to get a lot of surface dirt and dust and things out of the fabric. So I hope that this preservation will enable this uniform to stay on display in the museum for a long time to come. But this particular uniform is a Gray Lady uniform, and I'm just curious, how many people know what a Gray Lady is? Okay, I think one person. Okay, so just a quick, just a little overview of what a Gray Lady is. A Gray Lady was a volunteer with the American Red Cross in the 20th century, and they basically did non-medical work. So they weren't a nurse or a doctor, but they were helping patients. They were doing things around the hospital that was very helpful. And I will give some more information about Gray Ladies a little later on, but that's just a quick overview so you know what that term is. But first, I would like to talk about Mrs. Duncan and her life before she worked as a Gray Lady. She was born on June 4th, 1913, to Hiram and Susan Braswell in McFarland, North Carolina, which is just over the South Carolina border. She was one of 6 children in her family, and her parents had a farm, and her father operated a cotton gin. As a child, she attended a local grammar school and later Morven High School. Not long before she went to college, she met Mr. David Duncan Sr. at a Halloween party, and upon meeting each other, they instantly knew that they would be married one day. They proceeded to date each other for a number of years, and she attended East Carolina Teachers College in Greenville, North Carolina. Now, during this time, her teenage years and her college years, her family was going through the Depression, and this greatly affected them. It affected the cotton business greatly, and it also affected her parents. They both had additional jobs with the railroad, and their salaries were cut in half. As well, during this time when she was in college, things were very tight with money, so she had to get additional work at the college so that she could help with expenses. In 1937, she married Mr. David Duncan Sr. After they were married, they lived in Greer, and not long after, she took a job in the school district of Ballinger 96 in Spartanburg. There, she was a teacher as well as a principal. She later left this position before her son, David Vincent Duncan II, was born in 1947. I owe a lot of my information tonight from her son, Mr. Duncan, who is still living in Greer, so I'm very thankful for all the information he provided me. Mrs. Duncan was involved in the community in Greer in a number of ways. She was a part of the Greer Garden Club, as well as serving as a Gray Lady. In 1952, the Allen Bennett Memorial Hospital was opened, and not long after, in 1954, Mrs. Duncan, along with some other individuals, were together working to form the first Gray Lady unit for the Allen Bennett Memorial Hospital. Mrs. Duncan's uniform was used at that hospital from 1952 to 1957. According to the American Red Cross website, I quote, "The Red Cross Hospital and Recreation Corps, whose members were affectionately known as the Gray Ladies, began in 1918 at the Walter Reed Army Hospital in Washington, D.C. Their female volunteers provided recreational services to patients, most of whom were war veterans. During World War I, the service quickly spread beyond Walter Reed to both military and civilian hospitals throughout the United States." Continue quoting from this website, "The women wore gray dresses and veils as uniforms, and the soldiers affectionately called them the Gray Ladies. The name stuck, although the service did not become officially known as the Gray Lady Service until after World War II. The Gray Ladies for many years provided services of a non-medical nature to sick, injured, and disabled patients, including thousands of wounded American servicemen. During World War I, World War II, and the Korean War, the Gray Ladies wrote letters and read to wounded soldiers, helping them get involved in crafts and other activities, and did much to ease the loneliness and boredom of long hospital stays. The Gray Ladies continued to maintain a distinctive presence in American hospitals until the late 1960s, when the different volunteer branches of the Red Cross were discontinued in favor of a unified concept of the Red Cross volunteer. The Gray Lady service, as such, disappeared, and the volunteers who performed its traditional functions were simply called members of the Red Cross Volunteer Services. End of quote. As I said before, Mrs. Duncan worked as a Gray Lady, and she also took up 2 more school positions. First, she worked at a school off of Highway 290, and then at Pelham Elementary, where she was a teacher and a principal. She continued to volunteer as a Gray Lady, but she couldn't put as much time into that work as she had other responsibilities, and she eventually stopped serving as a Gray Lady. Mrs. Duncan passed away in 1996, but will be remembered for her service to her community. Greer was blessed by her work in helping to start the Gray Lady unit and her subsequent work as a Gray Lady. It's been a pleasure for me to learn about Mrs. Duncan and just her service to Greer. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for coming out to the museum today. Thank you to Mr. Lovegrove for organizing this event and for letting us speak. Today, I'm going to be talking to you about emergency services in Greer. And before I do that, I want to give you a little bit of background information on me. I studied history at North Greenville University before coming to Bob Jones. After that, I was a volunteer firefighter for a little over a year, and then spent about 2 years at Oconee County Fire Rescue as a firefighter EMT. And I am now studying criminal justice, and those last 3 show why this topic is important to me, because I have personal experience in emergency services. So for this presentation, I'm going to talk about a restaurant stable fire that almost destroyed Greer in its early history. We're going to talk about how the community responded. I'm going to go through the history of Greer Police Department and Fire Department, and then talk about those 2 departments, how they are now, and talk about the next steps of the project. On February 17, 1912, a gasoline stove exploded at a restaurant. There were conflicting opinions on how exactly this fire started, but it was so great that it spread to the livery stable that was behind the restaurant. This building was approximately 100 feet by 75 feet, so it was quite large. The community came together in response, and over 200 men and boys formed a bucket brigade. This was before the fire department, so the citizens responded to put out any fires. And the hero of the day was a man named T.W. Glenn. He was the one at the front of the bucket brigade line and continued to fight the fire until it was extinguished, even though his clothes caught on fire several times, and the other people there had to put water on him instead of on the buildings. And he ended up walking away with second-degree burns on his ears and neck, but he was the hero of the day because he didn't leave until the fire was put out. The damage was approximately $1,100, which doesn't seem like a lot, but if you adjust it for inflation, that's about $228,000 today. So it was almost $250,000 in property damage. And the fire was so great because, as it says, there was no fire protection in Greer at the time. So, how did the community respond to this tragedy? Well, I'm glad you asked. On November 1st, 1914, the Greer Fire Department was organized, but when they were first organized, they were known as the Greer Volunteer Fire Company No. 1. They had no full-time staff because it was all volunteers, men who had other jobs and took the time to respond whenever the community needed them. And they even joked that if one of their members was getting married on that day, he would leave his wedding to respond. So, In the 1950s through the 1970s, the fire department and police department were combined as one agency. And in 1975, they split into their two separate departments. Here's an overview of the timeline of Greer Fire Department. You might be wondering why that Franklin Mill is on this timeline, and I will answer that question in a little bit. One of the interesting things about Greer Fire Department early on is they had what's known as the fire contract. Their original jurisdiction was only in city lines, but people could pay a one-time $200 fee to ensure that the fire department would respond to their house if it was outside of city limits. And this was important to the firefighters because they were volunteers and didn't have any money coming in except for the fire contract. So this helped them pay for firefighting tools and equipment like the fire engine that was pictured in the last slide. And then the Franklin Mill was on the timeline because in 1976 it burned down and all of the mill houses became under Greer's jurisdiction. Before that, the mills had their own firefighting teams. And so the Greer Fire Department didn't respond to any of the mill houses until 1976. The Greer Police Department in 1845, Cicero Randall was appointed as the first town marshal, which was like an early patrol officer. The first chief, Macduff Littlefield, was elected in 1900. And then as Trent did a fantastic job of explaining to us, Willis Foster was killed in 1904. During Prohibition, they were tasked with taking care of the illegal moonshine making. And then in the 50s to the 70s, they were combined with the fire department, but became their own agency in 75. And I wanted to give a shout out to Paul Green, Greer's first identification officer. Most of this information came from him. He had firsthand knowledge of it, and he was extremely helpful. The timeline of the police department is much shorter because it's not as accessible to the public. The best guess I have is that the police department was created somewhere in 1900, and that's just the key highlights of the department. I wanted to take a second to talk about the only firefighter and police officer that were killed in the line of duty. Trent explained about Willis Foster, the only Greer officer who was killed in the line of duty. So I'm going to focus on Cole Miller. On November 21st, 1927, he was fighting a structure fire at a convenience store, and the second floor collapsed onto the firefighters that were down on the first floor fighting the fire, and it trapped them all. And the amazing thing about Cole Miller is he recognized that he was in a dire situation, so when the people came to rescue him, he said, "Leave me here, take care of them first." And eventually all of the Greer firefighters were rescued except for him, that he died from his injuries that day. Today, the fire department has more than 60 employees and responds to about 5,000 calls. It's not just firefighting. They have medical calls, respond to traffic accidents. They do rescues, all kinds of stuff. And then the police department also responds to a variety of things, including crime, major fires, and they also respond to medical calls. Here are some of the community programs that are offered by these two departments. They are both very involved in the community and want to build good relations with the community. So they offer a variety of different things where citizens can come and talk to officers or firefighters, get to know them, and foster those community relations. The next steps for my project, I'm going to be continuing doing my research. I want the research to be available to the public because right now it's very difficult to find this information and it should be accessible to the public. So I'm going to be working with the Greer Fire Department and Police Department to bring this information to you. And then if you want to learn more about the fire department or the police department, you can go to them and ask questions. They love to be involved with the community. They would love to talk to you. And then you can also come back to the museum because the new exhibit is about fire and crime in Greer, and you can learn more about it when the new exhibit is open. Thank you so much.
Thank you, one and all, for being here. It's a real honor to be able to present to you. I also want to thank Dr. Bradley and Mr. Lovegrove over there very much for their assistance. They were extremely helpful. I'm Joshua Stevens. I'm a film major at Bob Jones University, and I'm from North Carolina. And I also, fortunately, am lucky enough to have a history minor, though, so that's been really fun. And I'm really excited to be able to present to you today. So, World War II, as we are all aware, was an enormous conflict and that it scarred most of the world. And it did not leave the U.S.'s home front untouched by any means. Americans were forced to live with the realities of war even in places like our small town Greer. It might surprise some of you to learn that, yes, actually, Greer did prepare in the form of air raid drills and blackouts and other general preparations for attacks from the air during World War II. So why was Greer doing this? Many well-taught historians will tell you there was really no cause for fear on the East Coast. Berlin lay roughly 4,000 miles from the East Coast, and their longest-range bomber, the Hinkle HE-177, couldn't even make it half that distance. And this plane, according to reports, liked catching fire more than it liked flying. So it was never a threat. Germany did try to develop a total of 7 aircraft carriers throughout the war, but they couldn't hardly even get them to float, so they were never a threat either. But there was a very real presence of war very near where we are now, though. Off the coast of North Carolina, near the Outer Banks, roughly 80 ships were sunk in less than 6 months within sight of the coast. And this place became known as Torpedo Alley. And roughly 24 ships were sunk off the coast of South Carolina, and hundreds were sunk off the coast of off the east coast of the United States in just under 6 months. It was said that the flaming vessels burned so brightly that one could read a newspaper by the glow at night. So the war was not across the pond by any means. It was very near where we are now. Also, of course, something that should be noted is Pearl Harbor. That tragedy was thousands of miles from this coast, but obviously something like that has an impact and is always in the back of one's mind too. So there was that, and then Germany was bombing England there for several months every night, and that was a tragedy that was seen in theaters across the nation. So people were very familiar with this kind of thing. And the question was in the mind of, if this is happening to Britain, why not us next? They were our closest neighbors to the east. So the U.S. High Command was not blind to some of the unlikely dangers, but more so to the growing concerns and fears of the citizens. So in 1941, they created the Office of Civilian Defense, and the Air Raid Warden program was within the umbrella of that organization. And the U.S.'s thought was they didn't have a ton of resources to pour into home defense, and they didn't view it as a big threat, but they realized the citizens were more than ready to take up defending themselves in the form of this program. So Fortunately, we have some excellent records here at Greer and that show us how they were involved. Um, At the time these records were made, there were 38 wardens who had completed the program here in Greer, and I think there's about 30 pages of this with multiple names on each list. So I think there must have been hundreds who were training in this town. And so I was very interested in what exactly were these wardens doing. We don't have extremely specific information from this town as to what they were doing, but we have a lot of extensive information from across the nation that will give us an insight more so into what the wardens in Greer were doing. So Greer was most likely divided into sectors of about 500 people each, and an air raid warden's post would be in that sector with a senior warden in charge, and then he would have 3 to 6 assistant wardens under him, and then there would be a precinct warden who would look over, be in charge of about 4 to 15 posts, and he would report to a chief warden. There were lots of different wardens. And all these wardens were volunteers. They received no pay, but they received extensive training. So they were taught in things like administering first aid, extinguishing incendiary bombs, and containing gases, and doing drills and all that kind of stuff. And we can see from the Greer records that we have here at this museum that Greer participated in the same kind of training with first aid, gas, fire, all that kind of stuff. And also an important aspect of the warden's training was, excuse me, was knowing the streets really well and knowing the people on the streets. They needed to know if there were people who would need special help, and they also needed to know if there was people on the street who could give special help as well. So Greer did take the records even and the warden training even more thoroughly, and we have some more records that they have here. And they kept track of household preparedness, and they listed out a lot of things here. We have stuff like phones and mattresses, cots, rooms, just all that kind of stuff. And they pretty much had the whole town marked up, and there's, I think, about 30 pages here with different streets, different homes on streets, and they kept track of the homes by the names of the people who were in those houses. Probably the biggest thing, though, about the air raid warden's job was their oversight of air raid drills and blackouts. Blackouts, as you probably know, were just when a town would go completely lights out to avoid giving targets to aircraft or to warships. So this was the biggest thing that the air raid wardens oversaw. And these drills could only come at the order of the War Department and had to be announced well in advance. So they were usually in the newspapers several weeks before they were going to happen, because they didn't want to frighten anyone. The goal was to keep people from being afraid, not frightening anyone. So they would try and announce them as well as they could, and with posters like this. And they would typically announce them with fire alarms or very often church bells. So the drills they had in Greer were most likely announced with church bells and churches that are probably still standing here today. So the warden's specific job during the course of these drills was to make sure everyone was indoors, no cars were driving on the streets, and no lights like the ones we can see here were shining. But if they spotted even a glimmer of light, very often they would shout from their cars or go to the residence or something. I mean, not usually aggressively, but just trying to make sure people had the curtains drawn and that kind of thing. And it wasn't to the level that they did in Britain, but for sure they were very, even inland, they were very meticulous about it. So the question now arises: Did these blackouts and drills, did they do any good? Did they do any harm? And kind of what were their effects? They did have a sobering effect and were taken very seriously. And also they did have some negative effects in the increased darkness. Yes, there were some car accidents increased slightly. Nothing too dramatic, but and then there were also a couple cities where the crime rate went up a little bit. In the increased darkness, crime seems to thrive in darkness. Maybe the worst effect was when in Washington, a baseball game was cut short, professional baseball game. So I don't know, that may be a matter of opinion, but interestingly enough, on the East Coast, on the coastal cities, blackouts were resisted by people who thought it would affect tourism. And it's somewhat fascinating how times how calloused we as humans can be to other people's danger. And I think God gives us all grace to not be devastated by every instance of tragedy we hear, because that could completely overwhelm us. But we should always have care for others and love others more than ourselves, and be looking to the needs of others and not our own. And in these coastal cities, what would happen is their lights would illumine ships and silhouette them. And it actually made them very easy targets for U-boats, who would then pick them off rather simply. And somewhat ironically, but tragically, the fire of these ships would actually in turn illumine the cities that had caused them to be sunk. And it was these cities where people didn't want to turn out their lights because they didn't want to affect tourism. And it's a sad reality, but a kind of good reminder of how we can be somewhat petty at times and not think about other people. But fortunately, this was a minority of people and not a majority. And also, the good news is, even though they did cause some destruction in their own harbors, places like the Outer Banks, they began to take the blackouts very seriously, and the shipping losses actually decreased to almost zero by 1942. The U-boats completely lost their dominance in the East Coast waters. And I think it can make us proud of Greer, because just based off the enormous numbers we have in their records, they volunteered very quickly and readily to try and make their town safe. And the blackouts and drills, they were at times frightening, sometimes annoying. They were comforting to a lot of people who felt they were prepared. But the towns did have to live and face the prospect of air raids and falling bombs in their towns. But small towns like Greer showed that no matter the size, no matter on the East Coast or the West Coast, real danger, just a possibility of it, they stepped up, they answered the call for wardens, and this town did their best to protect their fellow citizens, their country, and their beloved town of Greer. So that's what I have for you. Thank you all very much.
Well, good evening. Thanks for spending your time here and listening. We've had some pretty good presentations tonight. My name is Luke Bomar. I'm a student at Bob Jones University. I'm studying music and history, and I'm from Greenville, South Carolina. In fact, my family has been in this region for quite a long time. As you can see, the Hughes and Bomar Grocery was one of the first Greer establishments, and so my presentation will have a lot to do with my family, but some other things as well. Now, let me start with a question. How many of you here have veterans in your family? That's a very big number. And so my great-grandfather was a veteran in the First World War. And this presentation, I will be focusing on three things. And I hope that you'll get something from what parts appeal to you most. First, I'll be talking about my family and my great-granddad's story. Second, I will be talking about his story and the war's effect in the region. And finally, I will be talking about things on a more national level that he was part of. So my great-grandfather was part of the 81st Infantry Division in the First World War. He was part of the 306th Sanitary Train and the 323rd Ambulance Company. He was working in ambulance crews to bring wounded men from the front to hospitals in the rear to get them healed. And one more thing. So this came from, I found a work about the division that he wrote in the 1960s. The 81st Division has very little historical research done on it, and I found that Furman University had in their archives a work that he wrote and was given by one of our family members to the university to keep. And very soon, there will be a copy accessible to the public with the Greer Heritage Museum online. So do take a look at that in the future. And so this is the 323rd Ambulance Company. And in fact, I have the original picture with me tonight. Right here. And this picture was taken on their way to France when they were in Norfolk, Virginia. And I'm not sure which one is my great-grandfather, but he's in there somewhere. And in his work, he wrote a lot about how he made friends and brothers in this experience. Now, the 81st Division was sidelined in the historical research mainly because they went to the front quite late in the war, and even when there was major fighting near them, they were on more of the flank of the action, so they were seen by their peers and people at home to have not really done too much in the war, but that is not the case, as people explain. Now, once the war started, there's the whole story about how the government and the nation as a whole responded to tides of war coming to our country. It's very interesting. And the government ordered the establishment of multiple permanent camps for military training and multiple semi-permanent camps for more of a mustering. Now, the irony, though, is that the permanent camp is no longer here, and the semi-permanent camp is still here. So the 81st Division, along with my great-grandfather, trained for a period of time at Camp Sevier, just down the road near Wadehampton High School. It is no longer there. All that is left is a piece of stone and this sign. However, when they were being mustered, in late 1917, early 1918, they went down to Camp Jackson, Fort Jackson now, in Columbia, South Carolina, where if you have family members that enlist in the Army today, they'll end up there. And the draftees actually helped build the installation at the time. And so, if I recall, they spent the winter of 1917 and 1918 there and did some very basic training. There it is today. And now moving on from less of the local stuff to more of the divisional stuff and national stuff. On your left, we see the commander of the 81st Infantry Division, General Charles Bailey. And on the right, we see the leader of the American forces in Europe, the American Expeditionary Force, as General Pershing. And the two had quite an interesting relationship. By all accounts, from what I've read, General Bailey of the 81st was a very capable leader, cared for his men under him, and was very careful to make sure that his subordinates were also very capable. Now, part of the interesting story about the 81st is they were the first U.S. military unit to have shoulder patch insignia. The men came up with it themselves. It spread. General Bailey liked the idea, and so they were called the Wildcats. There's their divisional insignia at the top left, and in fact, it has not changed barely at all to this day. And it was interesting because they encountered some rules and regulations that people said, no, you can't do that. That's not part of the uniform. And so they appealed to General Pershing. General Pershing thought it would be a great idea for morale, and he ordered every division to come up with their own insignia to put on their uniform. Here are some examples of that, and we'll quickly go through this. In the First World War, the American Army was split into three basic categories. First, you have the Standing Army, which was present before the war. And then you have the National Guard, which was also present before the war, but there had to be much shifting about in numbers and strength. And then you have the National Army, which the 81st was a part of, which was new divisions and divisions that had been weakened due to get people at the front soon in 1917. And the 81st Division was made mostly of draftees from North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee, and even some in Michigan and some places farther north. So the 81st Division gets into France late 1918. The war ends in November of 1918, and they were said to have been in a quiet sector. However, that would change close to the end of the war. Now, the very last offensive of the Allied forces in the war was the Meuse-Argonne offensive, and which went all the way up to the armistice. And while defending the flank of the American and French advance, The 81st Division actually sustained 20% of all American combat casualties on the last day of the war, on November 11th. So the 323rd Ambulance Company and my great-grandfather were busiest dealing with the wounded on the last day of the war. They remained in France through the armistice. No one knew how permanent it would be, and so they remained into 1919 and made their way back to England, and then New Jersey, I believe, and then back down to be demobilized in the spring and summer of 1919. Now, some things my great-granddad talked about in his work were, again, the brotherhood, and second, how, according to him, the reason why they were over in France was to kind of repay them for helping us in the revolution. We shared same ideas of liberty and freedom and democracy and such, and so he made quite the appeal, and he even compared much of the regions where he was in France, close to the French-German border, as being very similar to the Piedmont and the upcountry of South Carolina. He also appealed to the ideals of patriotism, which he, when writing it in the 1960s, felt that the younger generations were losing after the Second World War. In fact, it was very pressing for him at the time because he wrote this in the 60s right after the Cuban Missile Crisis. My grandfather actually served on a destroyer in the U.S. Navy in the Cuban blockade, and he briefly mentioned at the end the threats of communism to the American way of life. And it was very interesting to me while reading about this how he obtained these viewpoints through his experience in the past, and which we all have many different viewpoints of things today, but Providence has a way of giving us the experiences that we need. Much credit to the research for the 81st Division goes to Dr. Harold Allen Skinner of Liberty University grad. And that is my presentation. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here tonight at the Greer Heritage Museum.
All right, just a couple of comments before you go. First, there is a literal mountain of strawberries over here and cream, compliments of the class. So please feel free to dig in. Number two, one of our presenters talked about the air raid wardens, and the books he was talking about are on display right back here. And if you haven't seen it, there is also a song that was filmed that was played between movies in the theater that is titled Obey Your Air Raid Warden. If you haven't seen that, you should go back and watch that. The third item is we had one of our presenters talk about police and fire, and I am so glad the fire marshal wasn't here because we had about double the number of people come that we thought were coming. Thank you for being putting up with us, putting lots of chairs out. But we will need, if you would help along that back row, folding up those folding chairs so that we can open up that aisle. I would appreciate it very much. Okay, thank you all for coming. It's been great having you. Get some strawberries.